She wasn't even supposed to fly that day. Could this quiet tag-along hold a deadly secret? Just a name tacked onto the manifest. No squad, no clearance, no one listening when she quietly pointed out the radar anomaly before anyone else. Then the enemy breached open airspace protocol, broadcast a single message on a global military channel. No engagement unless Valkyrie responds. That's when everyone turned because the enemy didn't ask for the base commander. Didn't ask for a squadron lead. They asked for the woman they'd all dismissed as a tag-along. And what happened next? Nobody's forgotten since. Before we show you how it unfolded, make sure you're subscribed to Graceful Valor Stories and drop a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. The mission briefing at Al Jafar Air Base started before dawn. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead while the desert outside remained black as tar. Captain Sarah Chen sat near the back wall. Her flight suit faded at the shoulders where patches had been removed and replaced too many times. 36 years old, steady hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had seen better decades. The mug itself told a story. Chipped ceramic with a faded squadron logo from her first deployment. Back when she'd been someone worth betting on. Back when other pilots had asked her opinion on tactical scenarios instead of talking over her like furniture. She'd been assigned call sign Valkyrie 8 years ago during her first deployment. Back then it felt earned. Now it felt like an echo from someone else's career. "This is a standard escort run," Major Hendricks announced to the room of assembled pilots. For Raptors providing air cover for an ISR sweep along the Syrian border. Clean airspace. Minimal threat assessment. He paused, glancing at his tablet. "We've got a fifth aircraft joining the formation." The pilots turned in their seats. Sarah felt their eyes land on her like spotlights. She'd learned to recognize that look, the mixture of mild curiosity and subtle dismissal that came with being the person nobody expected much from anymore. Valkyrie will be flying as a backup escort in an F-16 Shadow formation. Optional engagement parameters. Hendrix's tone made it clear she wasn't expected to do much beyond fill out the paperwork later. Lieutenant Morrison leaned toward his seatmate and whispered just loud enough for Sarah to hear. "Wise tag-along on the roster. Someone needs their training hours signed off." The nickname had stuck 18 months ago. Not cruel exactly, but not respectful either. Just an acknowledgement that she was someone who followed along behind the real pilots, handling the logistics and cleanup that nobody else wanted to touch. The comment wasn't meant to hurt. After 18 months of riding the bench, she'd become invisible enough that most people forgot she could hear them. Sarah took another sip of coffee and kept her eyes on the mission parameters projected on the wall. Altitude restrictions, radio protocols, weapons authorization levels. She memorized them all. Even though everyone in the room assumed she'd never need them. Captain Torres, the flight lead, glanced in her direction. "Valkyrie, you'll maintain position approximately half a mile behind the primary formation. Stay on backup comms unless specifically addressed. Our role is to observe and report only." "Copy," she said quietly. It was the same instruction she'd received on her last 12 missions. "Stay back. Stay quiet. Try not to complicate things. The thing about being dismissed is that you learn to find purpose in preparation." Could this preparation save her squadron? Every morning for the past year and a half, Sarah had arrived at the flight line before anyone else. She'd run diagnostics on aircraft she wasn't cleared to fly, reviewed tactical scenarios from missions she wasn't assigned to, studied engagement protocols for threats she'd never be authorized to engage. Not because she thought they'd ever put her back in a cockpit that mattered, but because forgetting how to fly felt like forgetting how to breathe. She'd been one of the best tactical pilots in her graduating class, top 5% in air-to-air combat, top 10% in ground attack scenarios. Her instructors had called her intuitive, able to read the flow of aerial combat like some people read music. For 6 years, she'd been exactly the kind of pilot the Air Force wanted. Aggressive, precise, reliable, under pressure. Then came 7 trees, and everything changed. The meeting broke up with the usual pre-flight chatter. Pilots comparing notes, checking equipment, making jokes to burn off pre-mission nerves. Sarah gathered her things quietly and headed for the door, but caught fragments of conversation as she passed. Not sure why they keep putting her on the roster. Heard she had a meltdown during some classified op, probably just needs the flight hours to maintain certification. None of it was malicious. Just the casual dismissal of someone who'd gone from promising to peripheral. Sarah had learned to let it wash over her like background noise. Valkyrie. Major Hicks caught her before she could leave. Keep it simple up there. We don't need any complications. She nodded. Yes, sir. Standard protocols. What he didn't say, but what hung in the air between them, was that her last complication had cost her everything. 18 months ago, during a routine patrol over contested airspace, she'd broken formation to investigate what her radar showed as a possible downed aircraft. Turned out to be a decoy. Her wingman had to break protocol to cover her unauthorized deviation. And by the time they'd returned to base, the incident report was already being drafted. Poor situational awareness under pressure, the review board had concluded. Unsuitable for combat operations. They'd let her keep her wings technically, but wings without missions were just jewelry. The truth was more complicated, but the truth lived in classified files that nobody wanted to open. The routine patrol had been anything but routine. The contested airspace had been a black site operation that officially didn't exist. And the down aircraft she'd gone to investigate had been carrying intelligence that someone very much wanted to remain buried. But Sarah had learned that sometimes the truth was less important than the story people wanted to believe. Outside on the tarmac, 4 F-22 Raptors gleamed under the security lights like predatory birds. Sarah's assigned aircraft sat apart from the others. An older F-16 that had been modified for extended range communications and light payload capacity. Not the kind of bird you'd send into a dogfight, but reliable enough for what everyone assumed would be a milk run. The ground crew barely acknowledged her as she approached. No friendly banter, no last-minute equipment checks. They'd fueled the aircraft and run the basic diagnostics, but there was none of the careful attention she'd seen them give to the Raptors. Her bird was just transportation, and everyone treated it that way. She ran her pre-flight checks with the methodical precision of someone who'd been doing it since she could reach the pedals. Fuel levels, weapon systems, communication arrays, navigation computers, everything exactly as it should be. Everything ready for a mission where she'd follow behind and try not to get in anyone's way. The routine was comforting in its familiarity. Check the engine intake for foreign objects. Test the control surfaces. Verify that all the warning lights are illuminated properly during startup. Small rituals that connected her to thousands of other mornings, other missions when her call sign had meant something different. The tower cleared them for takeoff as the sun finally broke the horizon. One by one, the Raptors rolled down the runway and lifted into the pale morning sky. Sarah brought up the rear, maintaining position several hundred yards behind the main formation. At 30,000 feet, the Middle Eastern landscape spread out below them like a satellite photograph. Brown earth cut by irregular lines of roads and settlements. Mountains rising in the distance like jagged teeth. Beautiful in its way. Peaceful from this altitude. Up here, with the curve of the earth visible at the horizon and the sky darkening to purple overhead, it was easy to forget about review boards and incident reports. Easy to remember why she'd wanted to fly in the first place. Ghost Flight, this is Control, came the voice from base. The ISR platform reports all systems nominal. Maintain current heading and altitude. The flight lead Captain Torres acknowledged the formation. Sarah listened on the backup channel, staying quiet unless specifically addressed. That was the unspoken rule. Tagalongs didn't clog the comms unless something was actively on fire. For 47 minutes, it was exactly the routine mission everyone had expected. Clean radar screens, clear weather, no deviations from flight plan. Sarah found herself settling into the familiar rhythm of formation flying. Tiny adjustments to throttle and stick to maintain precise spacing, constant monitoring of instruments and communication channels, the meditative focus of keeping a $30 million aircraft exactly where it needed to be. It was the kind of flying that looked easy from the outside, but required absolute concentration. Every control input had to be smooth and precise. Every course correction had to anticipate not just where you were going, but where everyone else would be when you got there. Formation flying was less about individual skill than collective trust. The knowledge that everyone in the group was competent enough to hold their position under any conditions. Sarah had always been good at it. Even now, relegated to the back of the formation, she flew with the unconscious precision of someone who understood that aviation was fundamentally about not making mistakes. Then Control's voice cut through the routine with an edge that made every pilot in the formation sit up straighter. Ghost Flight, we're showing signal loss on the ISR platform. Last telemetry indicated possible contact bearing 090. Altitude unknown. Torres responded immediately. CC copy Control. Breaking to defensive formation. Sarah watched the Raptors ahead of her spread into a wider pattern. Each aircraft taking up positions that would allow them to respond to threats from multiple vectors. It was a textbook maneuver executed with the smooth efficiency of pilots who drilled it hundreds of times. She maintained her position behind them, but something on her radar display had caught her attention. There, barely visible at the edge of her scope, a contact that appeared for 2 sweeps and then vanished, reappeared 30 seconds later in a slightly different position, then disappeared again. The signature was too regular to be atmospheric interference, but too intermittent to be a solid contact. Sarah had seen enough radar ghosts to know the difference between equipment malfunction and deliberate deception. She'd seen this pattern before. During her early years, when she'd been assigned to test new electronic warfare systems, she'd learned to recognize the telltale signs of active radar masking. The way a skilled pilot could use terrain and atmospheric conditions to appear and disappear from detection systems. The way someone with intimate knowledge of radar physics could dance just on the edge of visibility, showing themselves just enough to be noticed, but never enough to be locked up. It was the kind of technique that took years to master. The kind you only learned if you'd spent serious time studying how radar systems worked and how to defeat them. The kind she'd been teaching herself during all those early mornings in the simulator. Control, Valkyrie, she said, keying her mic before she could talk herself out of it. I'm seeing intermittent radar contact bearing 085. Signature appears to be deliberate masking. There was a pause. Torres's voice is cool and professional. Valkyrie, maintain position. We'll handle the investigation. Copy, she replied, but kept watching her scope. The contact was still there, still playing the same game of electronic hide-and-seek. Whoever was out there knew exactly how to dance just on the edge of detection, appearing long enough to be noticed, but never long enough to be locked up. Sarah adjusted her radar gain and tried different sweep patterns, hoping to get a cleaner read on whatever was out there. The contact's behavior reminded her of something from her tactical training, a specific evasion technique that had been classified above her clearance level back then. But she remembered the instructor's description. When someone doesn't want to be seen, but needs to maintain situational awareness, they'll use intermittent masking. Show themselves just enough to see you, then disappear before you can see them. Ghost-led control. We're not showing any contacts on primary radar. Can you confirm the visuals? Torres's response was crisp. Negative visual contact. Scopes are clean. But Sarah's scope wasn't clean. The ghost contact was still there, still following its carefully choreographed pattern of appearance and disappearance. She started to key her mic again, then hesitated. The last time she reported something that nobody else could see, it had ended her career. Then every radio in the formation exploded with static. For 3 seconds, the electromagnetic spectrum filled with white noise so intense it hurt to listen to. When it cleared, a new voice was speaking on their frequency. Male, calm, speaking unencrypted English with the faintest trace of an accent that could have been Russian or Ukrainian or Polish. Ghost Flight. This is an unofficial contact requesting dialogue with call sign Valkyrie. The formation went silent. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice water. In her earpiece, she could hear Torres breathing hard, trying to process what had just happened. Someone had not only penetrated their encrypted communications, but had done it so completely that they were speaking in clear text on a frequency that was supposed to be impossible to intercept. Could this enemy hold the key to her past? Torres found his voice first. Unknown contact. You are in violation of controlled airspace. Identify yourself and state your intentions. The response came back immediately as if the speaker had been expecting exactly that question. I have no intentions toward your formation. I seek only to speak with Valkyrie. She will understand why. Sarah's hands tightened on her control stick. In 8 years of military flying, she'd never heard anything like this. Enemy pilots didn't request conversations with specific individuals. They certainly didn't do it over open frequencies where every intelligence agency in the region could listen in. Valkyrie, Torres's voice was sharp over the tactical channel. Do you have any idea what this is about? She hesitated for 3 heartbeats. The voice was familiar in a way that made her stomach clench with recognition she couldn't quite place. Like hearing a half-remembered song from a time in your life you tried to forget. Negative lead, no contact with unknown actors. But even as she said it, she was thinking about black sites and classified briefings and missions that officially never happened. About the 18 months she'd spent buried in paperwork and forgotten assignments, filing reports that disappeared into databases she'd never see again. The unknown voice spoke again, and this time there was something in his tone that made Sarah's chest tighten with recognition she couldn't quite place. Valkyrie knows what 7 Trees was. She was there when the real mission ended. The words hit her like a physical blow. 7 Trees, a designation that wasn't supposed to exist anymore, attached to an operation that had been scrubbed from every official record she'd ever seen. But she remembered 3 years ago a black site extraction that had gone sideways when their intelligence turned out to be 12 hours out of date. She'd been flying escort for an insertion team when everything fell apart. When the shooting started, the original plan became worthless and someone had to make a choice between following orders and saving lives. The mission had been sold to her as a routine personnel extraction. VIP transport from a diplomatic facility that had become temporarily untenable. Standard stuff. Fly in, provide air cover while the ground team collects their package. Fly out. Except the facility hadn't been diplomatic. It had been a black site interrogation center. And the package hadn't been a VIP. It had been 3 prisoners who'd been held there for over a year without any legal oversight. And the ground team hadn't been there to extract them. They'd been there to eliminate them. Sarah had figured it out during the final approach. When she'd monitored the ground team's communications and heard them discussing cleanup and sanitization in terms that had nothing to do with paperwork, she'd made the choice. Broken radio silence, broken formation, broken the chain of command to get 8 people out of a kill zone the command hadn't even known existed. Officially, 7 Trees had never happened. The after-action reports listed it as a training exercise with unexpected parameters. Unofficially, it had ended her career. Unknown contact, Torres was saying, you need to identify yourself immediately or we will consider you hostile. My identification is irrelevant. I am here for Valkyrie and I will speak with no one else. Sarah closed her eyes for 1 second, feeling the weight of a decision she didn't want to make. When she opened them, her hands were steady on the controls and her voice was calm. Control. This is Valkyrie requesting permission to establish independent contact with unknown aircraft. The radio exploded with voices. Torres shouted for her to maintain formation. Control demanding clarification of her request. Someone from intelligence asking if she'd lost her mind. Through it all, the unknown voice waited patiently. Finally, a new voice cut through the chaos. Colonel Briggs, the base commander, speaking directly from the command center. Valkyrie, explain your request. Sarah took a breath. Sir, the unknown contact has referenced a classified operation that I was involved in. I believe he has information relevant to current security concerns. What she didn't say was that she recognized something in the voice now. A cadence, a way of pronouncing certain words that reminded her of someone she'd heard during those final chaotic minutes of 7 Trees. Someone who'd been on the wrong side of the radio that night, coordinating the forces they'd been trying to escape. Someone who should have been dead. Permission granted, Briggs said after a long pause. But you maintain position. No unauthorized maneuvers. Sarah switched to a discrete frequency. She'd noticed the unknown contact had been monitoring. "This is Valkyrie. I'm listening. Hello, Sarah." Her blood froze. He'd used her real name. "You have me at a disadvantage," she said, fighting to keep her voice level. "I think you know who I am." "You should. You saved my life 3 years ago." And suddenly she did know. The voice belonged to someone who'd been flying a black market Su-35 over hostile territory when 7 Trees went bad. Someone who'd been coordinating with forces that were supposed to kill her team. Someone she'd broken every rule in the book to extract along with her own people. Because in that moment, watching him get shot down by his own allies for refusing an order, she'd realized he wasn't the enemy. Someone who disappeared into the intelligence black hole the moment they'd landed back at base. "Drake," she said quietly, "in the flesh. Or at least in the cockpit, you're supposed to be dead. I'm supposed to do a lot of things. None of them worked out according to plan." Sarah looked at her radar screen where the intermittent contact was still playing electronic peekaboo. "What do you want to return a favor? There's something happening that you need to know about. Something that involves both of us. I'm listening. Not over the radio. Come up to Angels 40 alone." Sarah felt her squadron leader's eyes on her through the cockpit glass, even though she knew Torres was flying 3 miles ahead of her. "I can't authorize that. You authorized 7 Trees. This is smaller." She was quiet for a long moment. Thinking about the past 18 months, about sitting in briefing rooms where no one expected her to speak, about flying missions where her job was to stay out of the way. About the careful, gradual erosion of everything she'd worked to become. About the fact that someone who'd been hunted for 3 years had risked exposure to contact her specifically. "Give me 2 minutes," she said. She switched back to the command frequency. "Control, Valkyrie requesting permission to investigate the unknown contact at higher altitude." "Negative," Torres cut in immediately. "You maintain formation, but Colonel Briggs overrode him." "Valkyrie, you have authorization for limited investigation. Weapons are cold. Return on command." "Copy." Sarah pulled back on her stick and felt the F-16 climb toward the thin air where the mysterious contact was waiting. Behind her, the formation grew smaller and more distant. Ahead of her, 40,000 feet up, someone who should have been dead was flying an aircraft that probably didn't officially exist. At Angels 40, she finally saw him. The aircraft was unlike anything in her recognition manual. Angular black with swept wings that seemed to bend light around them. It looked like someone had taken a stealth fighter and redesigned it from scratch, stripping away everything unnecessary until only the essential geometry of speed and invisibility remained. "Nice bird," she said over the discrete channel. "Thanks. I built it myself." "Well, mostly." They flew in parallel for 30 seconds. 2 ghosts at the edge of space before Drake spoke again. "They buried 7 Trees, but they couldn't bury what we learned there." "About the arms dealers?" About the shell companies? About the people in our own government who were supposed to be watching the Watchers?" "What are you talking about? The real reason 7 Trees went bad wasn't intelligence failure. It was sabotage. Someone wanted that operation to fail. Wanted everyone involved to disappear." Sarah felt a chill. "That had nothing to do with the altitude." "You're saying we were set up." "I'm saying we were loose ends and someone is still trying to tie us off." They flew in silence while she processed this. Below them, the world looked impossibly small and peaceful. Above them, the sky was deep blue, fading to black, the edge of space itself. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked finally. "Because they've been trying to kill me for 3 years, and I just found out they're coming for you next." "What? That mission today? The ISR sweep, it's not what they told you. The platform you're escorting is collecting intelligence on a black site that officially doesn't exist. A site where they've been holding prisoners from 7 Trees who were supposed to be transferred to Allied custody." Sarah's hands tightened on her controls. "How do you know this?" Because I've been watching, learning, staying one step ahead of people who want me erased. He paused. Your name came up in their communications yesterday. They know you remember too much about that night. So, what do you want me to do about it? Help me finish what we started. There's evidence at that black site that proves Seven Trees was intentionally compromised. Evidence that can bring down the people responsible. And if I say no, then you go back to your formation, finish your mission, and hope they let you live long enough to retire quietly. Sarah looked down at her fuel gauge. She had maybe 10 minutes before she'd have to head back to the formation. 10 minutes to decide whether to trust someone who'd been living in the shadows for 3 years. What's the plan? She asked. Drake's aircraft banked slightly, pointing toward a coordinate that wasn't on any of her official charts. Follow me. For the second time in 3 years, Sarah Chen made a choice that would end her career. She turned her aircraft away from her formation, away from her mission, away from everything safe and sanctioned and officially approved. And followed a ghost into airspace that didn't exist. Behind her, the radio erupted with voices demanding her return. Ahead of her, a man who should have been dead was leading her toward answers she'd been afraid to look for. At 42,000 feet, flying through airspace that belonged to no nation and acknowledged no authority, Sarah finally understood what Valkyrie had always meant. Not a mythological figure who carried dead warriors to paradise, a guardian who decided which warriors deserved to live. 20 minutes later, her fuel warning light came on and reality reasserted itself. She had to turn back, had to face the consequences of following someone into unauthorized airspace, and had to explain to her commanding officer why she'd abandoned her mission to chase shadows. But as she banked toward home, Drake's voice crackled over the radio one last time. Sarah, watch your back. And when they come for you, and they will, remember that being called a tag-along isn't the worst thing they can do to someone who knows too much. The flight back to base was the longest 30 minutes of her career. When she finally touched down, half the command staff was waiting on the tarmac. Their faces told her everything she needed to know about her future in military aviation. But for the first time in 18 months, Sarah Chen felt like herself again, like someone worth asking for by name. 6 hours later, sitting in a windowless debriefing room while intelligence officers asked the same questions over and over, she thought about ghosts and shadows and the difference between being invisible and being forgotten. Colonel Briggs entered the room at 1,800 hours carrying a manila folder that looked heavier than it should have. He dismissed the other officers with a look and sat down across from her. Valkyrie, he said quietly. We need to talk. Yes, sir. That aircraft you followed today, we've been tracking it for 18 months. Never could get close enough for positive identification. He opened the folder and slid a photograph across the table. Until today. The image showed Drake's black aircraft from multiple angles. Surveillance photos taken from her own gun camera during their encounter. In the lower right corner, barely visible, was a registration number that shouldn't have existed. This aircraft was supposed to have been destroyed 3 years ago, Briggs continued. Along with its pilot, Sarah said nothing. The thing is, the pilot who was supposed to be flying it when it was destroyed was listed as Drake Petrov, former Russian Air Force defected to U.S. forces during a black operation that officially never happened. He slid another photograph across the table. It showed a younger Drake in an American flight suit standing beside an F-22. He was one of ours, Sarah had been for 4 years before Seven Trees went wrong. Sarah felt the pieces clicking into place. He wasn't coordinating enemy forces that night. He was coordinating our extraction. And when the operation went sideways, when someone decided the prisoners needed to disappear permanently, he refused the order, same as you did. So they tried to kill him. They succeeded officially. Drake Petro died in a training accident 6 months after Seven Trees. Pilot error, they said. Closed casket funeral, classified burial site. Briggs leaned back in his chair. Except today, he used an unauthorized radio frequency to contact you directly and then led you to a coordinate that our satellites have been watching for 3 years. What's at that coordinate? Evidence, documents, communications logs, everything we need to prove that Seven Trees wasn't an intelligence failure. It was treason. They sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Sarah asked, "What happens now?" "Now you're getting your wings back. Full combat authorization. Immediate reinstatement." Briggs smiled grimly. "Turns out we need pilots who don't follow orders when the orders are wrong. And Drake, that depends on whether he's willing to come in from the cold and whether you're willing to help us convince him." Sarah thought about a voice in the darkness asking for her by name. About 3 years of being dismissed and forgotten and relegated to the margins, about the difference between being a tag-along and being someone worth calling for. "When do we start?" she asked. 2 weeks later, Sarah Chen stood on the flight line at dawn, watching the sun paint the desert gold. She was wearing a new flight suit with a fresh patch, Valkyrie in silver thread against black cloth below it in smaller lettering from the shadows. Her aircraft wasn't an F-16 anymore. They'd given her an F-22, fully loaded with authorization to fly anywhere in the world that American interests needed protecting. But today, she wasn't flying a mission. She was waiting for a ghost to come home. At 0630, a black speck appeared on the horizon. No radio call, no flight plan, no official acknowledgement, just a pilot who'd been living in the shadows for 3 years, finally ready to trust someone enough to land. As Drake's modified fighter touched down on the runway, Sarah keyed her radio. "Welcome home, Ghost." His voice came back clear and strong. "Good to be back, Valkyrie." And for the first time since 7 Trees, she felt like her call sign meant something again. They could take your wings. They could bury your career. They could classify you into irrelevance. But they couldn't take away the fact that when it mattered, when someone who'd survived 3 years in the dark needed help, they'd asked for you by name on a frequency the whole world could hear. Have you ever been written off by everyone around you only to discover that the people who really mattered never forgot your name? Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can be is someone worth remembering.